Hi, welcome back. So today we're going to test our valve bodies. To do that, you need a means of supplying high pressure into the feed port on the top of the valve body. So here's our brake pump testing machine. So what this is basically an electric motor, and that turns a shaft with a bearing, and that activates the push rod and activates the brake pump. Now this can be used for testing brake pumps, where you'll see the pressure gauge there and you can measure how efficient the brake pumps are, how well they're working. Or what I've done here is I've just fitted a extra high pressure pipe from the top over to this side so we can plug it into our valve bodies and pressurize them to see how well they hold pressure. So back with our valve bodies, what we need to do is we need to supply a high pressure feed into here. We need to connect a way of taking the flow of the return. Once it cracks off, it will return the pressure through here. We can bleed it at this point. This is where we're going to connect our gauge to. This is the Shadow 2 one, so there's nothing else on this side as with the Shadow 1, where you've got to blank that off because there's a brake pressure switch connection. So we also need to fit it onto a sphere, an accumulator. So that's what we're doing. I'll show you how I hook it up, and then we'll take some readings and see what pressure it's cracking off at. So here's our sphere. It is in 3 pieces effectively, each half plus this clamping ring. In between those 2 halves you've got a rubber diaphragm, and then this is the charging port where 1000 psi of nitrogen is charged, and that provides a reserve of pressure for your braking system. So I'll screw it onto the valve body now, and there's an O-ring in between there. The O-ring sits in the actual sphere. Now the normal technique for tightening these on is you hit them with a copper mallet to tighten them on. We're not going to need to do this for testing, they don't leak, but obviously if you're fitting it on a car it wants to be tight. So now you can see the sphere and valve body assembly. That's how they are in the car, mounted to the side of the engine block under the 3 screws on the valve body. And now we're going to pipe them up and take some pressure readings. So the first pipe I'm going to put in, there's an adapter with a washer. You can see the sealing washer underneath there. That's for the main high pressure pipe. Okay, so there's your high pressure feed in from the brake pump. There's the brake pump. The high pressure feed is going to come straight out the top of that brake pump and supply a high pressure brake fluid into this valve body. So you're going to tighten the adapter first, and then so now we're going to put the return line in. This is just a short pipe which will connect to a rubber flexible hose which can take it back to our reservoir. We've got the bleed screw in, we'll just nip that up. Okay, last thing is to put our pressure gauge in. It should go up to 2500 psi. So what you should see is it should flick up to 1000 psi, that being the sphere pressure, and once it's hit 1000 psi then the pump will slowly produce pressure up to about 2500 psi. Then it will stop building. That's when it will start returning through the return line, and then it will just leak back slightly and stop at hopefully around 2400, 2350, something like that. What we have to be careful of is that we take any fluid that's coming through the return and don't let it just squirt all over the place, because remember it's coming out at high pressure. So we've got a couple of flexi hoses here to hook up. I don't need the one on the bleed nipple yet until I actually bleed it out. I put it on there anyway, so I've got it to hand when I need it. So again, we've got a high pressure feed in here. We've got the return here. We've got a bleed screw for taking all the air out. And we've got our gauge here. What I'll do is I'll just let the gauge build up the pressure sheet so you can see what's happening. So we're just gonna fire it up. Okay, so it's cracking off at around 2,300 and it's leaking back to about 2,100, where it's about holding. So I would say this wants another shim in it to try and increase the amount of pressure it's cracking off at. We're ready again to test it. I've taken it apart and put in behind the spring another shim. This one actually didn't have any shims. A lot of the Shadow 2 ones I tend to find more likely to have no shims in. Maybe it's just because they had less time to weaken the springs and let them been adjusted, but I don't know. So we'll run this up again with one shim. The shims come in different sizes. This is quite a thick one. I haven't measured it because I don't actually know the science behind the shimming and the pressure, but it's a bit of trial and error. So we'll go again. Right. So as you can see, that time it cracked off just at 2,500, so we were lucky with our shim. It did exactly what we wanted it to do. There will still be some air in it, so we'll bleed it out again. I'll show you this time the bleeding process, which is pretty straightforward. I just have to try and do it without end up getting soaked in brake fluid, because this hose is only on loosely. So you see that come down to 0. We'll run it up again, ensure that everything's good. I'm very happy with the pressure it's coming off at, 2,500 psi. Just want to make sure it drops off and holds a good pressure below that. It went up to 2,500, which is what you want. As you're braking, every time you use some of this pressure, you'll eat away a little bit of that pressure. And then what will happen is, as it gets below about 1,700, it'll kick back in and start building pressure again. So what I'll do now is I'll run the brake pump. So it'll go up to 2,500 psi, leak back, and then I will take some pressure away using the bleed screw, and you'll hear the noise of the pump increase as the valve body stops returning pressure and allows it to start building and loading the pump again. Let me run it up again, we'll get it up to pressure again, and then I'll show you when it kicks back in. So the pump's just about gone quiet enough for me to be able to speak to you. So you can see it's now about to hold off. Now, if we were to use the brakes, or in this case, undo the bleed screw slightly, it would get, I'm just going to crack that off. You see pressure's dropping because I've reduced the bleed screw. So again, what was happening there was when it was building up to pressure, the pump's still running, but as soon as it gets to 2,500, it no longer builds pressure, and then the pump is returning straight through the valve body back to the reservoir, and then it will hold pressure there until you use the brakes or use part of the pressure. Every time you use the braking system or hydraulic system, it will eat away at that pressure until it gets to about 1700, 1800, and then the valve body will kick back in again and allow it to build back up to 2500 psi. And now that it's all bled out nicely, you can see that's holding at 2300, which is exactly where you want it. Starts returning at 2500 and holds pressure at 2300. That is exactly where you want your valve body to be. So this one is definitely a pass. Now we've got the Shadow 1 hooked up. The Shadow 1 has the connector for the brake pressure switch. Other than that, it's identical, hoping that it cracks off at 2500 psi there. Let's run it up and see what we get. Not bad. Let's bleed it out. So, as you can see there, it's struggling to actually crack off the pressure. Now, I think that might be because we're running low in our reservoir. So what I'm going to do is depressurize it completely, top up the fluid, and then we'll go again. Okay, so we're ready to go again. I've topped up the fluid. So let's, fingers crossed, hope this starts performing as it should, and build up to 2500. So what's happening there, I think, is where the fluid may have run low, the brake pump just needs priming. So I'm just going to back it off again. Just crack the brake pump. Now this is the same thing you could do on the car, because sometimes if you have just changed a shroud, changed a brake pump, changed a feed hose, there might be air in the pump and it won't draw in the fluid. I do think this is pressurizing now because it just started firing in when I just turned it off last time. But it what you can do is you can just crack this off and see. Fluid coming out. So I think that's what it was. We ran dry in our reservoir, which meant that it couldn't quite crack off, and then the pump needed priming. So let me just depressurize that again. Depressurize it fully and we'll go from the beginning. All of this stuff can happen on your car, so it's worth knowing. I mean, if you were to be bleeding out your brakes and you run dry and then you couldn't get any pressure, it might be because your pumps need priming. So let's go again. Okay, so it's cracked off at 2500. It's just dropping back. We'll cycle it a few times so you can see that it's returning nicely. It starts building again nicely. Effectively what I'm doing there is operating the brakes by taking pressure away using the bleed screw, which is using some of that pressure that's banked up in the valve, in the sphere. If you didn't have any gas pressure in your sphere, what you'd see on that gauge is it wouldn't flick up at all. So it would build up slowly from zero, and it would still go all the way up to 2500 psi and build up as normal, and then it would hold pressure as normal. But then as soon as you use any of the brakes, if you press the brakes once, it will shoot back down to zero. The only reason why you are able to use the brakes with a reserve of pressure is because the diaphragm in the sphere has got that gas acting against it. It banks that pressure up so you can use it bit by bit as a reserve. So again, this is stopping, it's holding at just over 2,000, well sorry, just under 2,300. It's cracking off just under 2,500. That is a pass. We want to make sure that there's nothing leaking and that the bleed screw's holding pressure, because sometimes, as you saw on the original Shadow 1 valve body, there was damaged seat and someone had put an adapter here. As you can see, this is a male union that screws in. It's an adapter, this male adapter. Normally that would be the braided flexi to the frame to the actual braking system. The seat in this port was damaged, so someone had made an adapter to seal on a washer, which is a fair fix, but we can't obviously supply them like that. So this is a replacement body. As you can imagine, the same thing could happen with a bleed screw seat. Often these bleed screws are seized and they need drilling out, machining out, and there's a chance that the seat behind the bleed screw could get damaged. As you can see, everything's dry, clean, it's ready to go. All we need to do now is to torque up the cap nuts, make sure they're done tight, and what we do is put protective plugs all round. Next time we're going to be talking about the spheres, so I'll show you how a sphere is opened and resealed. So thanks for watching, we'll see you on the next one.